Hi guys, this is Lane Johnson, the author of Take Your Life Back Now, Breaking the Stronghold of an Addictive Relationship. I wanted to start off by talking about chapter 1, which is called Coming Out of Denial. One of the things I wanted to start off with was some of the questions I asked myself along the way. It starts the chapter off saying it's difficult to know where to begin. How did I end up here? Where did things go wrong? What could have prevented the path that I now find myself on? What were the signs that I missed along the way? Why did it take me so long to see the truth? Let me start at the beginning. So on November 25th, 1994, I married James, who I thought would be the man of my dreams, my soulmate, my life partner, a man who would do me no harm. I believed he loved me unconditionally and never would harm me. We enjoyed each other's company. We could talk for hours. He wrote me beautiful poetry, and so he had a heart of gold. How could I not love a man like this? Our marriage started off at this time, as most marriages do. The pool resources, the joys of being husband and wife, the first holidays, pool resources, moving into our new place, and just all the general things that go with being a new couple. We basically enjoyed ourselves pretty much. We enjoyed being together during this time. So about after about 6 months, then I began to pretty much notice a change in my husband, or what I thought was a change in my husband. And I attributed to maybe the fact that, hey, we were having a baby unplanned, the fact that he was starting to pretty much hang out more and more with his friends. He was being more influenced by the outside world than our actual relationship. One of the things I say in the book is how his true identity began to emerge after 6 months. At times he would be gone all day, leaving me all alone. Family resources were no longer pooled. The burden of household finances fell upon me. Every day I watched the man that I loved transform into a total stranger. Eventually, after my first daughter was 6 months old, he decided that he needed to find himself. So basically, I found myself abandoned with a 6 month old daughter while my husband went out and found himself. He decided that he needed his space. He needed to clear his hair from the family. He needed to find his way. So when I look back in hindsight, this began a cycle of abandonment that would last for the next 10 years. Anytime the stresses of marriage got to my spouse, I felt myself in the same predicament. He needed his space. He needed to find himself. He needed just to get out of the relationship just for a period of time. And one of the things I did notice during the time was that it always ended up being pretty much during the spring. Summer was when newness, and you need to change your environment. So I found that, like, mainly during the spring and the summer, that's when he found the time or the need to leave the family. So as I said earlier, this basically would begin a cycle of abandonment that would last for the next 10 years. But the unfortunate part about the cycle was I was too foolish at the time to even see the cycle. After the death of James' grandmother, he decided that he needed to leave our hometown, which was Philadelphia, and pretty much move to a different state. He moved to North Carolina. So basically, his intention was to leave myself and I believe at the time my daughter may have been 5 years old. He wanted to leave myself as well as my 5 year old daughter behind. So I discussed in chapter 7 that I decided that, hey, he's leaving good riddance. I'm staying grounded in Philadelphia. I'm not going to pursue this marriage. I'm not going to take his phone call. I'm not going to deal with him. So, in my mind at that time, I was free. So, after he pretty much moved to North Carolina, what ended up happening is that he started calling me, and after a few months, and decided that he needed, quote unquote, his family by his side. So I determined in my mind that I wasn't going to move to North Carolina. But what ended up happening was I felt the pull of God just saying, go one more time and give your marriage one more chance. So basically I ended up deciding after much kicking and screaming and being disobedient at the end of the day to God, I decided that I was going to move to North Carolina to be with my husband and to give my marriage another chance. So I talk about how I left my family, I left my church. I was a big part of the church at the time. I left my home. I left my job. Is basically everything I had known for the last few years. The majority of my life I basically left behind to save my marriage. And in this book chapter, I talk about how once I moved to North Carolina, this would begin basically an obsession with saving my marriage. I decided once I moved to North Carolina, no matter what, I was going to, whatever my spouse needed, whether love, whether it was financial, whether it was um, equipment, cars, whatever the case may be, I decided that I owed it to him pretty much to quote unquote save my marriage. So anything he said, this began my obsession with saving my marriage. After a few weeks in North Carolina, I began to see the extent of James' problem. Keep in mind, when I lived in Philadelphia, he had some of the same problems, but I guess because I was surrounded by my family and my friends, I really closed my eyes to the extent of those problems. I really was somewhat ignorant or in denial, as the chapter talked about. I pretty much chose not to see what was right in front of me, pretty much. I always had an outlet with running to my mother's house. I had an outlet too, going with my sister, my friends, being at church. So I never really had to deal with the problem that I really had starting in Philadelphia. So as I moved to North Carolina, I say in the book, week after week, his riotous activity drained not only my bank account, but my spirit as well. Day by day, a piece of me began to die in my relationship. The extent of my despair could be heard in his journal entry. As I reflected on the events of the past weeks, the time James and I spent together, the trips to the hospital, the joining of the church, the birth of the baby, I could not understand how I had gotten to this point. It hurt striving to have a good family life only to be met by hurt and disappointment. Why can I never achieve the life I seek? Why do I continually come fully circled to the place I began? So I found myself in this time of my life pretty much in a period of despair. Cause keep in mind, here I'm in a new state. Here, I did things a little bit different than I did in Philadelphia. I had a joint bank account, which at times ended up being drained. I had given my spouse a new child that he demanded. Anything financially he needed, I was pouring it and pouring it and pouring it to, I basically exhausted everything I had. So basically, I found myself in this dark cycle, and I had found out that I had a gamut of problem in my relationship, which ran from adultery to drug abuse. It appeared the worse the relationship ended up getting, the more I would long to stay in it and make it work. So, in other words, I believe I took on a Wonder Woman or a Superwoman approach. I felt as though that it was my job to save my husband. It was my job to make sure he was okay. And the sad reality of, even as I look back at this chapter, at the time I had one daughter, but I ended up having two by the end of my marriage or whatever. But the sad reality was a lot of times more resources were poured into my spouse than I poured into my own children. So looking back, that wasn't a good choice. Looking back, I wish I would have made different decision and pretty much given my children more of myself instead of giving basically a grown man more than he deserved. One of the things I also going to discuss is just the extent of like the financial, somewhat devastation. If my husband desired anything, whether it was the latest PlayStation game, DJ equipment, a child, even a child, whatever I could afford to give would be his. I found myself in a constant cycle of finding ways to make him happy. When my husband issued his command that I either give him another seed, which is a child, or leave, I dutifully complied. This compliance did not come without its own set of problems. And I just wanted to know, one of the things was, you either give me a seed or you leave. And the reality is I do have a seed right now that my seed is about 16 years old. And to date I've been a single parent pretty much for the last 14 years. And one of the incidents I talk about in this book is the date of actually having this demanded seed, which is my child. I say, after the birth of my second child, I found myself abandoned at the hospital. I had been waiting for hours for my husband to pick me up from the hospital. I ended up having to humiliate myself and have my sister and brother-in-law pick me up, which should have been a blessed event. When my husband did show up a day later, he offered some pitiful excuse. And even to compound the situation, when he did finally pick me up, not only did I not have my husband coming to pick me up from the hospital, I ended up, my bank account ended up a few $100s short to make the situation even worse. After my second child had turned 10 months old, my husband again decided that he needed his space. So this is crazy. This factor right here is actually crazy. So we all in church or whatever, we just came out of the same house pretty much. We're at church. So he decided, well, I need my space. So now keep in mind, I guess I've been married to this guy about 5 years at this point, or maybe eight. Could have been, I was married to him about 8 years at this point. So he's in church, we just left from the same home, and he decided that, hey, I've outgrown you. And how do I get that message from him? I get the message via note. He sent me a note through the usher telling me he had outgrown me. So basically it ended up, he gave me the note. We ended up again going back home after church. And when we got home, keep in mind he just sent me a note saying, hey, I've outgrown you. But he decided that he had a need. And it was a financial need in terms of maybe some medication he felt as though he needed, or something he needed at that time. So here I'm the woman that he said, hey, I've outgrown you, but I need you to go to the store to meet this need. So when I decided I wasn't going to meet that need, his reaction went from verbal yelling to just basically humiliation in front of my children. After this confrontation, we decided that it was time for us to separate, which was in our best interest. So one of the things that happened as a result of this separation was within a week he was engaged in an adulterous relationship. So one of the things I ended up finding out within myself or whatever is usually when a man creates a confrontation, when a man all of a sudden finds you as being this big problem, they're looking pretty much for an excuse to get out of a relationship. Instead of saying, hey, like his note said, I've outgrown you. He had the opportunity to just leave the relationship. He had to not only send me a note in church, he basically decided, let me go home and wreak havoc in your life pretty much. I later found the reason he decided he outgrown me was to engage with a relationship, and not only with just a random woman, an actual woman that went to the same church that we were in. Every Sunday I would endure the humiliation and whispers of church members who knew my untold secret. I could feel the jeers and the stares from my brothers and sisters. The extent of my pain could be felt in this entry. Still in the midst of my struggles, James came to church with his mistress. He is making me feel like a complete fool. The devil is a liar. I am more than a conqueror, and I know I will make it through this storm. When his seeds bear fruit, I will have no sympathy for him. He thinks he's Big Willie openly fronting his adultery. Yesterday, which is the sad reality, I realized that I had spent 10 years in a bad marriage. So keep in mind he abandoned me pretty much every year since my youngest daughter was about I believe, 6 months old. So it took me 10 years to quote unquote realize that I was in a bad marriage. I've been with a guy who has never really loved me. He's only been with me for convenience sake. He has hurt me too many times to count. The latest hurt is due to him needing to control someone. So basically, after this incident, I decided that I was going to move to Georgia after my marriage broke up. So one of the things that ended up happening in this situation, I decided that instead of staying in the state, which I pretty much came here to save my relationship, to be obedient to God at the time, I decided that, hey, why not go to Georgia, the state you pretty much wanted to move to? So what ended up happening in this time frame, I decided, hey, I'm about to move to Georgia, and I decided to go to my husband still at the time to let him know of my intentions. Because keep in mind, even though we're quote unquote not together, I still had 2 children by him. So one of the incidents I talk about in this time frame is I had gone to his job pretty much to inform him of my intentions of moving. So when I went to his job, one of his coworkers informed me that he had been taken to the emergency room. So against my better judgment, I headed to the emergency room. And upon my arrival, not only did I see James laying in the bed in a state of confusion pretty much, I also ran into the room with his mistress. So one of the things that happened when I'm in the room, I'm with my husband, I'm in the room with his mistress or whatever. So the doctor comes in and he says, he informs me and even with the mistress in the room about his condition. So one of the incidents, the doctor asked him like, oh, we're going to discharge you. You're going to need this done. You're going to need that done. And guess what? Lo and behold, who did he end up going home with and wanting to go home with? Good old-fashioned me, the one he had outgrown. So upon his discharge, he decided he wanted to live with me and our 2 children. This will open me up to an even greater emotional, relational, and financial drain. Yes, and once again, I will find myself humiliated and abandoned after 6 months of marital bliss. So in other words, okay, keep in mind I told you 10 years, it took me 10 years to realize I was in a bad relationship. So here again, bringing it into another year pretty much. I go to the hospital, you're injured, you're suicidal or whatever the case may be, and you decided that it's in your best interest not to go home with your mistress, but you're going to go home with the wife that you pretty much outgrown. So here's my ignorance basically. It's not really his ignorance. I decided that you could come back home with me and be with our children as well as myself. So finally, he's back in the house. He's living life, trying to quote unquote be the dutiful husband. So yeah, if things go normal for what? About another 6 months. And then guess what? You're abandoned again. So here's one of the things I talk about. After the latest abandonment, I had to sit down and truly take stock of what was going on in my marriage. It forced me to take a hard look at the situation and myself. It caused me to look at my own deficiency and dependency. In essence, it was truly when I started coming out of denial. And one of the things I credit in this book is to a good friend who, I had 2 good friends, one including my sister, and we pretty much would like be on a line about every week or so. So one of the incidents during this period of time, I'm on a line with these 2 ladies and I'm crying and acting, my marriage, this is hurting, that's hurting, and or whatever. So my one friend decided I'm not going to say anything. So we had this unwritten rule amongst ourselves is that, okay, we could say anything within this circle, long as it stays within this circle. So one of my sister come back because she's in the circle. My friend is in this circle. So the friend ended up telling my sister, I really can't cry for Lane. Because one of the things, because this friend knew me since I lived in Philadelphia. So she basically said, hey, you allowed somebody to take your power, basically. You gave them that much authority over your life. You let them drag you through the mud. You made the choice to allow them to weaken you. So we ended up having a heart to heart conversation where this friend actually came out and said, "Hey, I don't feel any sympathy for you because you've given this person too much control over your life." So that's when I really, really believe that I started coming out of denial. And that's one of the things I want to recommend to any woman that's going through this. Don't just have the friends that's going to pity pat with you. Don't just have the friend that's going to say you're okay. Have those friends that you trust enough to not hurt you, but sometimes you need a friend to give you a good kick in the behind, basically. And so I'm so grateful that I actually was allowed the privilege and still to this day have friends that'll say, "Hey, I'm going to give you a kick in the behind." So coming out of denial was one of the hardest things I had to do. I compared it to pretty much a woman giving birth. As the truth was being birthed in my spirit, the pain was overwhelming. I had to come face to face with the reality of who and what my husband was and who and what I was and had become. His controlling nature had ruled our home with an iron fist. When it came to control, particularly emotional control, he was pretty much the head of the ship or whatever. But when it came to things such as finances, nurturing, speaking into our lives or whatever, I say he abandoned ship. One of the things I talk about was because of my desire to be loved and find wholeness in my relationship. I allowed my own emotional shipwreck. My vision of who my husband was pretty much was clouded by what I wanted him to be. So, in other words, I saw him a certain way. I wanted him to be a certain way. And that's all I could see at that time was no matter what the circumstances were saying, my eyes was only seeing what I wanted it to be. So to me, that's part of being in denial. When you're looking at the true circumstances, but you allow pretty much to look through rose-colored glasses. And I just remember one of the things I talk about in this chapter is if anybody even thought to come up against my relationship, my marriage, to speak against it or whatever, I found myself distancing myself from that type of talk. Like at the time, I didn't want to hear what anybody had to say. I wanted to make my own choices to live my life to basically carry out this obsession to saving my marriage. So it says here, due to my own illusions, the line between fact and fiction became blurred. I wanted so desperately to see myself in a picture perfect relationship, I allowed myself to be denigrated to the lowest level. So, not only I had a husband, but at the time, I didn't have a husband that nurtured me. I didn't have a husband that helped me financially. I didn't have a husband that, at the end of the day, who loved me unconditionally, or not even loved me unconditionally, but loved me the way, even in the Word of God, it said, "Husband, love your wives." I didn't have that. So I say, coming out of denial forced me to read my life like an open book, which in turn to allow me to rid myself of the baggage that I had been carrying for 10 years. It allowed me to see the shell of the woman I had become and begin to become the woman that God had ordained for me to become. I began to feel a new awakening, a newly found freedom I had never known before. Through the process of pain, I found the road to healing. So one of the things I would like to leave you with is a great point of this chapter is really having those friends who are accountable, who are not going to just say, "Hey, keep being in that same situation, keep doing what you did yesterday, and I'm going to just sit here and cry with you." I really stress having real accountability partners, those who are going to push you beyond, even beyond your hurt, that's going to push you even beyond your pain. Those are going to make you look at your life and to say, "Hey, you can sit there and blame anybody, but at the end of the day, It's about your own choices. You're making a choice to be hurt. You're making a choice to stay in a relationship that's detrimental. Yes, I know you have children. Yes, that's fine. Nobody wants to grow up and have their children growing up in a single parent home. But at the end of the day, what are the signals that you're sending to these children? Why are you allowing this hurt? Why are you allowing this pain? So I just want to leave you with, even if you find yourself at the beginning of this journey, really take stock and begin to ask true friends to help you see truth if you can't see it on your own. Ask your true friends to open your eyes. Maybe you'll have a friend that will able to speak into your life. Maybe this video can speak into your life. So at the end of the day, I want you to come out of denial, and that will begin the road to true healing. So again, this is Lane Johnson with the first chapter of Take Your Life Back Now, Breaking a Stronghold of Addictive Relationship. I hope to see you at the end of this journey, and I hope to see you as we go to chapter 2 when you start taking a stock of who you are and who and what you have become. Again, Lane Johnson, have a great day.